My grandfather's casket was halfway in the ground when a woman in a white fur coat and 6-inch heels stepped through cemetery mud like she owned the place, pointed one blood-red fingernail at my chest, and said, "You really think a dead farmer meant to leave all this to some software guy from Atlanta?" The wind caught the smell of wet dirt and funeral roses while everybody froze around us. And before I could even process what was happening, she smiled and added, "That land belongs to people who actually know how to build something valuable with it." Right there beside my grandfather's grave, that woman started a war she never understood she was going to lose. My name's Mason Hale. I'm 35 years old, and about 8 months ago, I inherited 800 acres of farmland outside a tiny town in Tennessee called Blackwater Ridge, though honestly, calling it farmland never really felt right to me. To my grandfather Walter, that land was memory, blood, history, the kind of thing men spend their whole lives protecting because it becomes stitched into who they are. Walter Hale raised me after my parents died when I was 10. Big old mountain of a man, hands rough as cedar bark, voice like gravel rolling downhill. The kind of guy who never said "I love you" directly, but somehow showed it every single day anyway. Every summer night, we'd sit on his porch swing listening to crickets while he smoked that old cherry pipe tobacco that made the whole porch smell warm and ancient, and he'd tell me stories about Vietnam, drought years, cattle auctions, bank loans that nearly broke him. Stories about surviving long enough to become harder than the problems try to kill you. Then I grew up, moved to Atlanta, started doing cybersecurity consulting, built myself a clean little city life full of coffee shops and apartment elevators, and people who complained if grass got too tall. I still visited Walter once a month, though. Sometimes twice if work didn't swallow me whole. I just never expected the old man to leave me everything. 800 acres. Timberland, cattle pasture, lakeside property, mineral rights, all of it fully paid off, worth somewhere around $4 million, according to the lawyer, who kept adjusting his glasses like even he couldn't believe it. And apparently I wasn't the only one shocked, because 3 days after the funeral, that woman showed up at Walter's farmhouse driving a pearl-white Range Rover with custom plates that read Prez 1D and 7. Her name was Vanessa Barron, president of the Ridgeline Estates HOA, a luxury subdivision built right beside Walter's property about 5 years earlier. Fake blonde hair, expensive perfume strong enough to punch through the smell of hay and diesel fuel, permanent smile that never reached her eyes. She walked into my grandfather's kitchen like she'd rehearsed it, glanced around at the old wood cabinets and faded linoleum floors, then sighed dramatically. God, this place is depressing. I remember gripping my coffee mug so hard I thought it might crack. She sat down across from me anyway, crossed her legs slowly like some courtroom actress, and said, "Walter was stubborn, but I think you're probably smart enough to see opportunity." That word, opportunity, the way rich people say it when they really mean extraction. She slid a folder across the table. Development renderings, golf villas, luxury cabins, a private marina. "My investors are prepared to offer you an excellent number," she said softly, watching my face the same way gamblers watch roulette wheels. Blackwater Ridge could become the next resort destination in Tennessee. I looked out the kitchen window toward Walter's cattle field, sunlight rolling across grass he'd spent 60 years protecting from banks, developers, and politicians, and I swear I could practically hear his laugh in the back of my mind. "No," I told her. Simple as that. She blinked once, smile tightening just slightly. "Mason, I don't think you understand how difficult things can become out here." "Funny," I said, "my grandfather survived war, floods, and 3 recessions on this land. I think I'll manage an HOA president." For about 2 seconds her mask slipped clean off. Cold eyes. Mean eyes. Then the smile came back. Everybody has a price eventually. She stood up, smoothed her coat, and before leaving she stopped beside Walter's old family photo hanging near the hallway. "Men like him always stand in the way of progress," she muttered. Then she walked out into the afternoon sunlight like she'd already won. What I didn't know yet was that Walter had spent 40 years quietly building a trap for exactly the kind of people Vanessa Barron worked for. And before this was over, half the county was going to watch her entire empire collapse in public. The first lawsuit hit my mailbox 4 days later. Thick envelope, expensive legal letterhead, the kind of paperwork designed to make ordinary people panic before they even finish reading the first paragraph. I was standing barefoot in Walter's kitchen, holding cold coffee, when I saw the words petition to suspend property transfer pending investigation. And for a second, I honestly just stared at it while the old refrigerator hummed behind me and rain tapped softly against the windows. Vanessa wasn't bluffing. She'd officially filed claims questioning Walter's mental competence during the signing of his will, accusing me of manipulating an elderly veteran for financial gain. According to her lawyer, a silver-haired shark from Nashville named Elliot Crane, it was highly suspicious that Walter left everything to a grandson who had limited involvement in the agricultural operation. Limited involvement. That one pissed me off more than anything else. I buried fence posts on that land before I was old enough to drive. I bottle-fed calves during winter storms. I learned multiplication, calculating feed costs beside Walter at the kitchen table while other kids played video games. But to people like Vanessa, if you didn't wear cowboy boots every day and chew tobacco during county meetings, you were just another outsider. The temporary injunction froze almost everything. Timber sales, equipment transfers, land development permits. Hell, technically I needed approval to remove dead trees near the north fence line. That was the moment the fear finally settled into my stomach for real. Because grief's one thing. Grief feels personal, quiet, almost sacred sometimes. But legal warfare? That feels invasive. Like strangers walking muddy boots through your house, touching things they have no right touching. I remember sitting on Walter's porch that night, listening to frogs down near the creek while the darkness swallowed the hills, thinking maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe I didn't belong there anymore. Maybe I really was just some city guy pretending to understand a life he'd already left behind years ago. Then I looked down and noticed Walter's old work gloves hanging beside the porch door, exactly where he always left them, cracked leather stiff with decades of sweat and dirt, and suddenly I heard his voice clear as day in my head. Never let soft people scare you off hard land, boy. That old man could still straighten my spine from the grave. Next morning I drove into town and started digging. Freedom of information requests, county zoning records, HOA filings, development permits. Every dusty document Blackwater Ridge had buried inside courthouse filing cabinets for the last 10 years. Turns out small-town clerks become real cooperative when they loved your grandfather and hate rich outsiders. Especially if you bring donuts. 3 days later, I found the first crack in Vanessa's perfect little kingdom. Ridgeline Estates wasn't just some wealthy subdivision complaining about livestock smells and tractor noise. The HOA had been quietly coordinating with a development corporation called Horizon Peaks Ventures for almost 2 years. Internal emails showed discussions about acquiring surrounding underutilized acreage before Walter had even died. Underutilized acreage. Imagine calling 800 acres of working farmland that survived 4 generations underutilized. One email stopped me cold, though. Subject line, water access contingencies. Attached maps showed something Walter had explained to me years earlier during one of those long porch conversations I barely appreciated at the time. Ridgeline Estates depended almost entirely on groundwater routes connected to springs originating beneath Walter's property, which meant, technically, their entire luxury subdivision survived because Walter allowed it to. I sat there inside the courthouse archive room, smelling old paper and dust while my pulse started climbing higher and higher. Vanessa thought she was squeezing me financially. She had no idea Walter still held the strongest card on the table. That night I called her. She answered on the second ring, sounding almost cheerful. Ready to negotiate? You know, I said calmly, Walter used to tell me water rights matter more than land around here. Silence. Tiny silence, but enough. Funny thing, I continued, walking slowly through Walter's kitchen while thunder rolled outside. I reviewed county hydrology records today. Looks like Ridgeline Estates sits downstream from our spring system. Another silence. Longer this time. What exactly are you implying, Mason? Her voice changed completely. Gone was the fake sweetness. Now it sounded sharp, calculating. Nothing, I said lightly. Just figured neighbors should understand each other's vulnerabilities. I swear I could hear her jaw clench through the phone. And from that moment on, the war turned ugly fast. Anonymous complaints flooded county offices claiming Walter's cattle contaminated local waterways. Somebody reported unsafe fuel storage on our property. Animal welfare investigators suddenly appeared wanting access to barns that had passed inspections for decades without issue. Then came social media. Facebook groups full of suburban homeowners suddenly posting dramatic concerns about reckless agricultural mismanagement. Somebody even spread rumors I planned to lease acreage to industrial waste companies, which honestly would have been funny if half the county hadn't started whispering about it at gas stations and church parking lots. Vanessa understood something dangerous about modern America. People believe headlines faster than neighbors. But she made one huge mistake. She assumed Blackwater Ridge was still just a quiet rural town full of easy marks. She didn't understand people had known Walter Hale for 60 years. Men trusted him with loans they never wrote down. Women trusted him watching their children. He rebuilt barns after tornadoes without charging families a dollar. He donated beef to struggling churches during recession years. Around Blackwater Ridge, Walter wasn't just respected. He was woven into people's lives. So when Vanessa started attacking his memory, people noticed. One afternoon, an older waitress named Jolene slid into my diner booth, carrying pie I didn't order, and whispered, "You ought to know Vanessa's been meeting developers behind Carter's Marina every Thursday night." Then the hardware store owner told me somebody from Ridgeline Estates had been buying surveying markers in bulk. Then the librarian quietly printed internet searches left open on public computers. Can inherited farmland be seized through zoning litigation? How long before adverse possession claims become valid? Emergency environmental condemnation procedures. That last one gave me chills. Vanessa wasn't trying to pressure me anymore. She was building towards something bigger, something permanent. And honestly, part of me still hoped maybe it would stop there. Maybe she'd realize I wasn't selling. Maybe the lawsuits and intimidation were just rich people throwing tantrums because they weren't used to hearing no. Then one night around midnight, my trail cameras caught her trespassing near Walter's North Creek with two men carrying industrial chemical drums out of a black pickup truck. I sat there at my kitchen table watching the footage replay over and over while rage crawled slowly up my spine like fire. Because suddenly everything made horrifying sense. Vanessa wasn't planning to prove contamination. She was planning to create it herself. And standing there in Walter's old farmhouse with rain hammering the roof above me, I realized something that changed the entire shape of this story. My grandfather hadn't left me a farm. He'd left me a battlefield. I didn't call the sheriff right away. That probably sounds crazy now, but when you grow up around old men like Walter Hale, you learn something early. Patience wins wars louder men usually lose. So instead I watched. I documented everything. Every late-night truck. Every suspicious meeting. Every fake inspection request that somehow appeared 24 hours after Vanessa visited county offices in person wearing designer sunglasses and pretending she cared about environmental safety. And the deeper I dug, the uglier it got. Turns out Horizon Peaks Ventures wasn't just building luxury resorts. Federal investigators had quietly been tracking them across 3 states for laundering money through rural development projects. Fake conservation grants, inflated construction bids, shell companies buying farmland through intermediaries. The whole thing smelled rotten clear to the center. Vanessa wasn't just greedy. She was desperate, which explained why she kept escalating like somebody running out of time. Then Walter finally played his hand from beyond the grave. Funny place to find a legal nuclear weapon, too. Inside an old biscuit recipe, tin hidden behind canned beans in the pantry. I was cleaning the kitchen late one night when the box slipped off the shelf and exploded recipe cards all over the floor. Cornbread recipes, handwritten grocery lists, old church fundraiser notes, and folded between two yellowed index cards was a document dated 1971 stamped with state conservation seals. I sat there at the kitchen table reading it 3 times because my brain honestly refused to process what I was looking at. Walter had placed the entire property under a protected agricultural covenant over 50 years earlier. The language was brutal in its simplicity. If the land was ever forcibly rezoned for commercial or luxury residential development, ownership rights automatically transferred to the State Conservation Authority permanently. No compensation, no legal override, no loopholes. Any developer attempting forced acquisition would lose everything instantly. I leaned back in that creaky kitchen chair, staring at the ceiling while thunder rolled softly through the mountains outside. And for the first time since the funeral, I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from realizing somebody far smarter than everybody else already solved the problem decades ago. Walter knew people like Vanessa were coming someday. Maybe not her specifically, but people like her. The kind who looked at mountains and saw profit margins instead of history. Next morning, I drove straight to Walter's attorney, an old Appalachian bulldog named Franklin Pike who wore suspenders and looked permanently disappointed in modern civilization. I handed him the covenant paperwork and watched the corners of his mouth slowly twitch upward. "That old bastard," he muttered, almost admiringly. "He really did it. You knew about this?" I asked. Franklin nodded once. "Walter said if vultures ever circled this land, they'd hang themselves eventually." Then he looked directly at me over his glasses. "Son, your grandfather built the legal equivalent of a Claymore mine." After that, everything moved fast. Franklin coordinated with state conservation officials while I kept gathering evidence. Vanessa, meanwhile, kept digging herself deeper. She bribed a county inspector on audio recordings. My cameras caught her people damaging fences and dumping more chemicals near the creek. One night, they even tried setting fire to Walter's old hay barn, though thankfully the sprinkler system Walter installed years ago kicked on before the flame spread. Watching security footage of Vanessa standing near the tree line in that white coat while smoke curled into the night sky honestly changed something inside me. Up until then, part of me still viewed this as a nasty property dispute. But standing there in the dark smelling wet ash and gasoline while firefighters stomped through mud around Walter's barn, I realized Vanessa would have burned every memory that old man built if it made her rich enough. That's the kind of greed people don't recover from morally. The final showdown happened during a packed county zoning hearing 3 weeks later. Whole courthouse overflowed with reporters, locals, developers, even federal agents sitting quietly near the back wall pretending not to pay attention. Vanessa arrived dressed like she was attending an award ceremony instead of a public execution, cream-colored suit, perfect makeup, that same polished smile she always wore when she thought she controlled the room. Then Franklin Pike stood up. God, I'll never forget that silence. He walked slowly to the projector screen, carrying a single folder while rain-hammered courthouse windows behind him. "Before this board proceeds," he said calmly, "you should understand that every rezoning application tied to the Hale property constitutes automatic trigger conditions under state agricultural conservation law." Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. Franklin displayed the covenant on screen, then the bribery recordings, then security footage, then financial records connecting Horizon Peaks Ventures to ongoing federal investigations. You could physically feel the room changing around her. People leaning away, whispering, realizing all at once they'd been standing beside a lit fuse. Vanessa finally snapped about halfway through the hearing, jumped to her feet screaming that Walter was a backward hillbilly hoarding valuable land while real visionaries tried bringing money into the county. Then she pointed straight at me in front of everybody and yelled, "That old man was too selfish to understand progress." And that right there, that was the moment she lost Blackwater Ridge forever. Because insulting me was one thing, but insulting Walter Hale in a room full of people whose roofs he repaired after storms, whose sons he helped bury after wars, whose mortgages he quietly paid during hard winters, that was social suicide. I stood up slowly and looked directly at her while the entire courthouse sat dead silent. "You know the difference between you and my grandfather?" I said quietly. "He spent his whole life building things he'd never live long enough to benefit from. You destroy things the second they stop benefiting you." Even the federal agents looked impressed by that one. 2 months later, Vanessa Barron was indicted on conspiracy charges, fraud, attempted environmental tampering, and bribery. Horizon Peaks collapsed under federal investigation. County officials resigned. Ridgeline Estates dissolved their HOA within the year because homeowners discovered Vanessa had quietly buried them in debt financing fake expansion projects. And Walter's land? It still belongs exactly where it always belonged. Part working farm, part protected conservation land. Kids fish in the creek. Now, during summer programs we run for local schools. Veterans use the cabins near the Timber Ridge during recovery retreats. Sometimes at sunset, I still sit on Walter's porch listening to the swing creek beneath me while the mountains turn gold in the distance. And every now and then I think about Vanessa saying men like Walter stood in the way of progress. Maybe she was right. Maybe some things should stand in the way. So now I want to ask you something. If you inherited land your family protected for generations and outsiders tried taking it in the name of progress, what would you do? Would you fight to preserve it or cash out and move on? Let me know in the comments because honestly, after everything that happened in Blackwater Ridge, I still don't know where the line between justice and revenge really is.